Well, you know you've done something as a singer-songwriter, much less a young, up-and-coming singer-songwriter, when you make a great poet of the previous generation cry upon hearing your work. And as most of you probably know, that is what happened to Allen Ginsberg, one of the great beat poets, pictured here, when he first heard Bob Dylan's music after returning to the United States from a sojourn. The song in question is, of course, A Hard Rain's A-Gonna Fall. This is just a towering achievement for any songwriter at any stage in their career. All the more so because of Dylan's youth here and his, basically inexperience. The song is very wise and wizened. It has a true prophetic quality to it, and this was definitely noted at the time and by those looking back, but not just in the narrow sense. A prophet does not just mean somebody who predicts the future, and prophetic is anything that relates to a prophet. So in both the narrow and broad sense, Dylan casts himself as a true prophet in this song. Now, in the narrow, everybody probably knows where I'm going with this, the song is often associated with the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'm going to put a pin in that, though, because the song stands on its own as a just great work of art, really, regardless of any coincidence it might have had with later historical events. So let's go back to the beginning. The beginning in this case is the 17th century, 1600s, a long time ago, because once again Bob Dylan is reaching back into the ancient, basically, song catalog to look for the seed with which he's going to, plant a new tree. And his process is really interesting. It's accidental. He said this in interviews, and he's demonstrated it, that he'll just kind of be fixated on a song, and that will lead to him changing words, changing the music, and it just kind of metastasizes. Now, that's not to say it's how he wrote all of his songs out of the hundreds and hundreds that he's written, but it does seem to be at the heart of his creative process, and this song here is a great example. So, speaking of the inspiration, let's get to it. Lord Randall. It's a tremendous song. This is an ancient Scottish, Anglo-Scottish ballad, and it's about a mother receiving her son back home after he's been gone and finding out that he was poisoned. The song has a strong call and response structure, which is part of a larger tradition, so she will ask him a question, he will respond. That'll be, a whole section. Then it'll repeat itself again with a different question. Already in this video series, and we just got started, we've seen examples where a song inspires Dylan, but it really is just the beginnings, and not much is kept of the original. This is not one of those cases. He really kind of mimics the structure here. I guess you could say he updates the song. That might be the closest to an accurate description that we can come up with, but it's definitely more than that, because as always, he changes the essence of what he's using. You'll often, like now, hear me struggle with how to define what exactly Dylan does, because it's not easy to grasp, and it's not easy to classify. What I would say he's doing here in this song is taking this model, right, Lord Randall, keeping the structure, staying very loyal to that, but turning it into a statement on the times he was living in the 20th century, in the Cold War, and on his own personal journey as a young man who also left home. In this song, I think he envisions himself as Lord Randall coming back, but he hasn't been poisoned, and he wasn't off just to see his lover or to go hunting. He went off to become an artist. Then, just to layer in a bit more, he doesn't just go on to be an artist, he's going on to be a prophet. So he kind of springboards and taps into an even deeper, older tradition using the song. So we've already thrown in a few things that the original, inspiration song doesn't do. Here's another. Dylan provides an almost endless gallery of images in this song as he is asked, what he saw and who he met. It's just was really astounding parade of mysterious visions, and that's what they seem like. It's more like visions than something you'd actually see, and that ties back into the prophetic kind of vibe of the song. Interestingly, then, he does prophesy his own role, the one that society, and especially his generation, will put him in, as this kind of spokesperson for the baby boomers and this speaker of truth to power about what's wrong with the world. The figure on a mountaintop shouting out a warning to the populace. And this song is, in part, a warning. And one of the things it warns about, despite Dylan's denials, I would say, is nuclear war. He famously rejected the notion that the hard rain was a metaphor for nuclear fallout. I think what he was really rejecting, just my opinion, but I'm pretty confident in it, is the direct association with something from a song, as in, oh, this stands for that, in a literal sense. His songs are much more ambitious than that, and he embraces ambiguity, like with Blowin' in the Wind. And of course, he was a child of the Cold War. He probably took part in, you know, air raid drills where schools practiced what to do if Russian nuclear missiles started raining down, and a nuclear apocalypse was really top of mind in a lot of ways, and there was a craze of building fallout shelters. In other words, I think the apocalyptic warning of the song, of the refrain, "a hard rains are gonna fall," can be applied to nuclear war, very specific temporal danger that was going on when he wrote the song, but should be applied more broadly as intended by its author. This is, of course, like "Blowin' in the Wind," where a song is more powerful and enduring if it doesn't tie too specifically to anything. Probably we're overdue on getting into the details of the song, so it's a massive one. For one thing, it's 57 lines across 5 stanzas, has over 500 words, so it really dwarfs anything that he'd put out before. He said that every line in the song, basically, every line in the song is a line that he was writing to create another song with, and then he just put them all together, if that makes any sense. So every line was the beginning of another song that he thought he would never get around to writing that many songs, so he threw them all in here. I don't believe that. Not literally, anyway. I'm sure it describes part of the creative process related to this song in particular. It would help explain the wonderfully disassociated nature of the lyrics, as we'll see here in a minute. You have this cascade of images that I was talking about. Well, they don't seem to relate to each other very much at all. It really is like a prophet just relating to you the many visions that he or she received from God. Let's look at the first stanza to get an idea of not just those images, but the overall structure they're going to see repeated throughout the song. So you always have 2 questions posed to the sun. Here it's, "Oh, where have you been, my blue-eyed son? Or where have you been, my darling young one?" And the central question changes over and over. What did you hear? Who did you meet? Then the question really changes with the final stanza in kind of that Dylan-esque way of letting you know that things are about to wrap up with, "Oh, what'll you do now, my blue-eyed son?" So it's a different kind of question. Then you'll have the narrator answer with the kinds of images that we were talking about, and then the refrain will always kick in. Looking at the meat of the response portion, so before the refrain, you have this great alliteration. You have misty mountains, 7 sad forests, a dozen dead oceans. It doesn't do that every time, but it does it a lot, and one thing it does just as much is count. Notice that you have 12 misty mountains, 6 crooked highways. And then those 2 devices come together on the final line before the refrain. "I've been 10,000 miles in the mouth of a graveyard." So pretty startling on a couple of different fronts, the visuals being one, and speaking of misty mountains, there's me in some misty mountains. Hey, I had the picture, and I was Googling for misty mountains, and I realized I had that. Another observer of the song mentioned that the counting seems to kind of numerology going on in that stanza helps give it a biblical feel. I definitely agree. I do not think that was by accident. The lines in the song overall have this kind of ancient feel and this kind of, oracle-like openness to interpretation. So on one website alone, especially because there's so many of them, the song is so dense, just on one website alone, casually glancing at the conversations, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Joan of Arc, Jesus, Peter, Noah, William Blake, Billie Holiday, Chagall. Names like that pop up as people are grasping with just some of the lines in the song and not a majority at that. And then there's more that you can trip over or at least question yourself. Like, oh, gee, I wonder if this is a Dante reference. I saw a black branch with blood that kept dripping. Great alliteration for one thing, but it's a chilling line, as a lot of the lines in this song are. It can make you think of lynching, hence the picture here, maybe make you think of Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday, but it also could be a very clear reference to a line from the aforementioned Dante. That vision comes from the "What did you see, my blue-eyed son?" stanza, the second one. One of the other things that he saw was a highway of diamonds with nobody on it. That has that mystery that we talked about earlier. Nobody knows what that means, I can't imagine. We could guess all day. It's just there, and there's a lot of lines like that, just in the same stanza. I saw a white ladder all covered with water. That's a device, I call it the does not compute device. It's a terrible name, but it's something Dylan employs early in his career and often, and of course throughout the entirety of it. It really lends weight to a song, but I think it has to be done right. It's easy to write down just a nonsense line. Anybody can do that. But how do you do it and make it sound like you know what you're talking about? And if we want evidence that there is something impressive about it, something that's, hard to replicate, just look at iconic singer-songwriters who've, been influenced by Dylan, which is practically all of them, and how many of them have used that kind of surrealism successfully in their lyrics. I would say very few. Billy Joel, he got interviewed with Elton John at the same time. So I think it was Billy Joel, said that, he tried to write surreal lyrics like Dylan's and then quickly moved on. It just didn't work. And it also calls to mind Dylan's interview on 60 Minutes when he recited some lyrics and told the interviewer, try to write something like that. It also reminds me of Dylan telling Keith Richards, I could have written Satisfaction, but you couldn't have written Tambourine Man. Back to the song itself, in the stanza that we're on, the What Did You See, there's all these rolling images that we talked about. One theme that I think comes out and that I think is within the song is indifference, just like within Blowin' in the Wind. So in this part of the song you have, I saw 10,000 talkers whose tongues were all broken. I saw guns and sharp swords in the hands of young children. Then in the next stanza, I heard one person starve. I heard many people laughing. Well, the next stanza moves on to go back to the order of the song here. And what did you hear, my blue-eyed son? And what did you hear, my darling young one? It's a great couplet that starts every stanza. But of course it changes a little bit every time. It's a great device. Anyway, when it comes to hearing, I'll quote, I heard the sound of a thunder, it roared out a warning, heard the roar of a wave that could drown the whole world. Well, that couplet obviously makes you think of the biblical flood, which is a real recurring theme in his music, but also very apt in a song that's about a hard rain that's gonna fall. Something that you're being warned about in this song, right? This rain is coming. So further down, I'll just do one other highlight from here. Here's a great couplet. Heard the song of a poet who died in the gutter, heard the sound of a clown who cried in the alley. It's got that classic Dylan juxtaposition, clown versus poet, cried versus died, and gutter versus alley. At the end of the stanza, of course, you get the refrain, and one thing I should point out is the way that the opening couplet and the refrain bookend each section, each verse, each stanza, is really great, and sandwiched there in the middle are these just dense, mysterious images. Randy Kroll, I think it was, said about Mr. Tambourine Man that one of the things that amazed him about it was how it kind of set you up a little bit and then deep dive into all these dense images, and then you'd kind of come back up, catch your breath, it would set you up again, and then dive back in. I think this is the first song where we actually see that from Dylan. But moving on in the song, we're to Who Did You Meet? Oh, who did you meet, my blue-eyed son? The first line in response is, I met a young child beside a dead pony. That's a really touching line, and you really have to think back to previous generations, especially. A pony was like the classic dream gift for a child. It's been replaced by electronics now. There's a lot of other great lines in here, but I'll go ahead and skip that. Basically, he meets this succession of people, and the lines are really open to interpretation. There's possible Joan of Arc, possible race relations, commentary, all kinds of stuff. But you kind of work your way through there, and you notice, hopefully, the one hint of hope in the entire song, which is right in the middle of this stanza and in the middle of the song. I met a young girl, she gave me a rainbow, while the rainbow then again calls to mind, of course, the flood. So maybe people will come out on the other side of this harder rain, this apocalyptic event that the singer is warning about. Well, we've made it to the end of the song, and you should realize that the song is ending because the question is now, oh, what'll you do now, my blue-eyed son? Oh, what'll you do now, my darling young one? So we've shifted from the narrator catching, presumably his mother up on all the things he's seen, the people he met, etc. What is he going to do now that he's seen all these horrible things? The time jumps, if you will, in the song are great. So, at the beginning, the son is come back home. Then we kind of travel to the past as he catches his mother up on all the things he's seen. And now it's the future. What are you going to do going forward? One big part of the song that I think is overlooked, or often overlooked, is the autobiographical nature, or at least touch to it. Bob Dylan, it should be noted, has blue eyes. He, of course, left home, right, to go become a singer, to pursue his dream. That's a recurring theme in his work for, decades and decades, how leaving home. I think this is almost kind of an imaginary conversation with his mother on what he thinks he's going to do at this point in his career, and it turns out to be exactly what he did go on to do, which was become this voice of a generation, no matter how much he hated that label and all the responsibility that came with it. He kind of spells out what is going to happen in his career, including on this album. As people were first listening to this song, he was in the very process of becoming the undisputed king of protest music, no matter how much he would later maybe hate that distinction. Just one more thing to appreciate in this song, at least if it's there, and I think it is this melding of Dylan with Lord Randall. I mentioned that earlier in the video as well. There's a little bit more depth on it, and that kind of works with the rhythm of the song because now there's much more depth on the narrator, the character in the song, who I think Dylan, of course, portrays himself as. So you get the longest stanza by far. It's 16 lines long, and it's laser focused on the artist's mission. I also think it's as startling a statement on said mission as you're going to find really anywhere. You know, he says he's going out before the rain starts, and he's going to where the people are many and their hands are all empty, where the pellets of poison are flooding their waters, poison then possibly being a little link back to the original Lord Randall, where the home in the valley meets the damp, dirty prison, where the executioner's face is always well hidden, where hunger is ugly, where souls are forgotten. He's going to go to where the suffering is, so that, quote, and I'll tell it and think it and speak it and breathe it and reflect from the mountain so all souls can see it. Then I'll stand on the ocean until I start sinking, but I'll know my song well before I start singing. Those 4 lines in particular are what I was referring to as just this really extraordinary statement on the artist's mission, or his mission, as he saw it at that time. That part specifically being the one that made Allen Ginsberg cry, if I recall. And the line about the mountain, I think, really punctuates and resurfaces the prophetic biblical, motif, and reflect it from the mountain so all souls can see it. As you might be able to tell, I think the song is an astounding piece of work. It's very complex, very challenging, so much so that the great Patti Smith, who we're looking at here, stumbled famously while singing it at Dylan's Nobel induction. That doesn't stop it from being a fantastic rendition of the song, and really just was a really touching moment anyway, so kind of made it even better. Also, I think it says something that was a song chosen for such an occasion. Well, I said I was going to get back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and believe it or not, I am. So a final note. Roughly a month after Dylan first played this song in public, the Cuban Missile Crisis began, or became known to the American public. Quite the historical coincidence, and one that would be echoed decades later with Dylan's album Love and Theft and the events of 9/11, but more on that later, much later. Thanks.